Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and I have something unexpected today. I was planning to release the other podcast compressor, the one that's called Podcast rather than Podcast Deluxe, that can come along next week. Something came up. I was working on a plugin, and here it is. I even tweeted about it. It was so exciting. And it is called Remap. Now, what Remap does is, well, I can show you, but it'll take a little explaining, and check this out. And I crank it up. Not hearing much of a difference, huh? That's because Remap exists to handle extremely loud peaks. What it does is it essentially is able to take a full-scale sine wave, and it turns that full-scale sine wave into a sort of vaguely triangle wave kind of thing. It's remapping the way that slightly overdriven stuff goes so that it will spike a little hotter. It'll even spike hotter than the original waveform was. And it'll reshape some of this. It's taking the distortion and kind of expanding it outwards. The remap control shows you where that kicks in. And the reason we're not hearing it on this house music is the house music simply isn't loud enough to engage it. It's not really meant to change the sound of stuff that is already well behaved. However, I've got some other different music today, and some of it is probably familiar, some of it maybe not, but I can show you how some of that works. This is something called The Journey Begins. Now notice that this is already a lot louder. You could say that was kind of over-mastered. It has been pushed to be essentially too loud for a straight-up mix. And when we do remap on this one, I'll show you what happens. Let's pad it down a little bit. You can push it until there are these big spikes poking out the top, and it's peaking at louder than we started. Now it defaults to 0.5. The idea here is to use Remap to increase the spatiality and peak energy of tracks that don't have it anymore, or just stuff that's distorted. It is your punch maker. It'll make drums poke out, it'll make overtones poke out, it'll even make performance cues like intensity of vocals, sonority of instruments, stuff like that poke out. So it is a very useful thing in its way. And I'll show you what this sounds like on this rather over-distorted track as I move Remap between around 0.5, where you start to seriously hear it, and 1 when it's clipping all over the place. And we'll back the output down a little bit for this. Turn it off. And of course that's very smash, it's very loud. And we've got this dry wet control, so if you dial in something that's punchy, you can also fade it back a little bit. wait, there's more. I've got other tracks because I added a whole bunch of essentially rock-style tracks out of my library, the Crush All Boxes library that I have up online that is many years of weird recordings. And they included a fair amount of just sort of heavy rock, heavy metal, styly stuff going on. So I don't have to just show only house music now. I can show other things, like, for instance, this. Okay, it's a little bit like house music, but wait for it. Now let's see what this sounds like when we throw a Remap on. We can get a real crunch going on here. Again, 0.5 is about where you'd put it in general for not really doing anything obnoxious. Above 0.5, you get into that zone where you can start spiking things out and having obvious distorted crunch. This track is another one of those ones that's just kind of over loud and smashed. So what you get with this, and I will put the output all the way up because we're padding down the output with bit shift gain, and as such, I can demonstrate this. Turn it on. Now it's very loud. There's one example, and I've got a few more, so I might as well play all of these since I've got them. Here's something called Nothing Nowhere that is just a snippet out of a far too extended bit of audio. Kind of rock style remap. Now with this you can plainly hear, since it's a live instrument style recording with basically like live drums and live bass and live guitar, different things poke out at different times. And that means if we crank Remap up all the way as we're doing, what we're going to hear is different spikes poking out and more space in the mix. And again, that's kind of exaggerated. You dial it back to clean up the crunchiness. Here's dry. So that's obvious enough to hear what it's doing. In that case, let us goose the output maybe a little tiny bit, and we're going to dial back Remap until it sounds bigger, because there was a little more space and it was a little more solid and bigger sounding, but with crunchy spikes poking out. So we're going to tune it until it's expanded just a little bit beyond the very aggressively distorted raw stuff. And let's see what we get. Too much? Not really enough. then we'll bring in a little dry. So now that ends up sounding more listenable and a little fuller and a little more sort of attitudinous than we started with. And I'll demonstrate that by clicking it on as we play. Here's your raw sound. Awesome. On. Notice that the kick drum and the general sort of guts of the track came out a lot easier with Remap on, because it's reshaping all that really overly distorted loudness in the top of the mix there and putting more transients in where they can fit. We'll do a little bit of a track that is from a sort of fandom song, and we haven't heard these before for a reason, but now we're liberating them. Here's something that was originally called Twilight Sparkle's Eyes. Now it's called Twilight Sparkle's Edit. Kind of a rock and roll thing, kind of retro. Remap. With this one, it's so bassy that the bass is spiking out using Remap. But we can moderate that, seeing especially since bass is more of a sine wave shape, so it fits very well with being adapted into the triangle-y shape, or if it's a slightly distorted sine wave shape, it'll be rounded back out again. The idea is you want to dial it in correctly, rather than just cranking it out, because there's a correct shape to be had, and it's exactly 1 point on this top slider. Let's find that point now. Not that. A little too much. Sounds to be about there. So there we have it. That's Remap for you. If you focus it right, it doesn't sound spiky, but we're getting some extra gain out of the mix. And the original sound was which is, it's okay, but some of the really loud stuff like that, you might duck remap down with automation or something, because it's going to a place where it's starting to really distort it. We can probably do that stuff over again and use less remap, because I've got it in there so that the guts of the track here, or indeed here, are poking out in the right way. From this to this. A little more physicality to it. Whereas when we go all the way up here, we're going to pull it right back. You should only have to go back to about 0.5. Also notice it's not a problem moving this around. The Remap is peculiarly friendly to automation. And lastly, another fandom song that actually was heard on a popular political blog once too. And it is what we might call a bit of sort of cheap trick or hair metal or something. Check this out. Now that's without Remap being on. And you can hear that's kind of glossy. You probably didn't know I did that kind of overproduced stuff. The drums are essentially synthetic and made in the DAW, although they're using my own drum sounds. And I think the bass might be manufactured out of multiple takes and stuff. The whole thing is basically very sculpted. And what we'll do now is fire up Remap. We have we've got a lot of room to navigate because this one is very punchy. The drums are providing a lot of the hard-hitting action, and it's not particularly flabby in the lows. So we get this. Compared to now let's dial it up. Until we have that grind on the edges of the guitars and things are separating out a little bit. And I'll show you a little bit of what it sounds like without it.
They were watching ponies on the New York Stock Exchange.
A little more space.
They all joined their hands and they set up a chant. And Discord oozed right through the screen like horror from Japan. And they sang Discord, welcome home. We're all so glad you're here. Discord, welcome home.
That's also me singing. I don't usually do stuff like that. I haven't had many things to sing about, but this being one of them. You might want to hear what that sounds like without Remap, because one of the things Remap does is it latches on to stuff like loud voices of that nature and changes them. So what we got without it is this.
Screen like horror from Japan, and they sang Discord, welcome home. We're all so glad you're here. Discord, welcome home. We've longed for this for years. We're here to do your bidding, so don't you dare be sad. Let's get this party started, 'cause there's chaos to be had.
Now let's hear that with Remap, because you may have noticed that was very loud. Everything's incredibly saturated. Everything's incredibly compressed. That's how it was done back in 2012 or whenever this was. Here's what it sounds like with Remap.
We're all so glad you're here. Discord oozed right through the screen like horror from Japan. And they sang Discord, welcome home. We're all so glad you're here. Discord, welcome home. We've longed for this for years. We're here to do your bidding, so
That was a lot gutsier. It was also kind of bassy and sloppy and sucking stuff out a little bit too much, and that's exactly why I added the dry wet control. So for a final thing, let's just dial in what sounds like a really big version of this sort of vaguely hair metal-y song. And we'll have Remap on, and we'll start bringing it in until we have the right kind of size and play the song out. And that'll be my demonstration of Remap, I think.
I saw something very strange. For they were
There's more
watching
space.
ponies on the New York Stock Exchange. People, they all joined their hands. And they said,
A little hi-hat there.
Chant. And Discord oozed right through the screen like horror from Japan. And they sang Discord, welcome home. We're all so glad you're here. Discord, welcome home. We've longed for this for years. We're here to do your bidding, so don't you dare be sad. Let's get this party started, 'cause there's chaos to be had.
Well, there you have it. Remap is like your anti-loudness war plugin. We can take stuff like some of these ones I've just been showing you that were mixed to be very smashed and over-loudinated. And depending upon how smashed they are and how soft the clipping is for how they're working, we can just reshape the peaks back to what they were supposed to be, to the tune of about 3 dB extra punch, or sometimes even more if the rest of the punch goes down in volume. It's like a focus control in that you're probably going to want to tune it between 0.5. You have access to less than 0.5 just in case you wanted it, or just in case you needed to apply this processing and be absolutely sure that nothing was getting crunchy or spiky on you. But you can take pretty much anything that is over smushed to where it doesn't have guts and remap all of the loud parts, remap all of the peaks, remap all of the overtones, the way you grab onto vocals, syllables that jump out. I just demonstrated that to the best of my ability. Now, maybe the song isn't exactly what you would have wanted, so I would say use this on your own stuff. Perhaps if you're a mastering engineer and you're getting stuff in that needs to be a little punchier, you might take this and say, if it's too much of a effect, if it's making things dial back and be you're having people be like, you're making my stuff less loud again, stop it. You could use only a small amount. But this is a tool that will let you take away some of the bloat of overly loud stuff of whatever kind. You could try it on like distorted guitar stems, for instance. You just dial in where the focus is correct. And there is one right answer for that, because there's going to be a particular point where it comes into focus. It's not going unusually crunchy, but it's taken away some of the bloatedness and the guts are coming back because it's using the waveforms that you started with and remapping them. And it's not doing it by some kind of fancy recalculating stuff. It's just remapping the transfer function. That's all it's doing, and it's doing it very smoothly and elegantly. Remap is free. It's audio unit and VST and all that kind of stuff, because that's just how I roll. And if this helps people get more guts into their tracks and not have them just be bloated and over-loudinated, then that is all to the good. If you'd like to support me being able to come up with something like this and turn it around and put it out in under a week, putting everything else on hold and being like, I need to put this out now, then jump on my Patreon. Pretend as if this was a $50 plugin and you were buying it at $50 if it becomes that indispensable to you. And jump on the Patreon for an additional $50 a year. If by next year I've done another plugin that you think is good, then you can stay on it, I guess. And of course, if the Patreon gets to $1,500 a month, I'll start doing a analysis of popular records Wednesday for my live streaming. For now, I'll talk to you later, and thank you very much. Bye-bye.